Before the United States of America ever flew a flag or inked a constitution, it was just 13 ragged colonies clinging to the edge of a continent. No army, no navy, no real government. And yet, these scattered settlements would soon take on the largest, most feared empire in the world, Great Britain. It sounds impossible, because it was. But history isn't made by what's probable. It's made by people who refuse to accept their place. In 1763, the British Empire had just emerged victorious from the 7 Years' War. The Crown now controlled lands across North America, and the colonies had never seemed more secure. But security came with a price. The war had drained British coffers, and Parliament looked to the colonies to pay their share. Taxes were levied. The Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts. To the British, it was fair repayment. To the colonists, it felt like a betrayal. They had no vote in Parliament, no say in how they were governed. No taxation without representation wasn't just a slogan, it was a warning. Protests erupted in Boston and Philadelphia. Pamphlets were printed in secret. Smugglers defied royal ports. Tensions simmered in the streets. Then came the spark. In 1770, British soldiers fired into a crowd of colonists in Boston, killing 5 men. The Boston Massacre, as it came to be known, ignited outrage across the colonies. But the real fuel came 3 years later, with a ship and a crate of tea. In December 1773, a group of colonists disguised as Mohawk warriors boarded 3 British ships and dumped over 300 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. The British response was swift and brutal. They shut down the harbor, dissolved local governments, sent more troops, but instead of submission, they triggered something far more dangerous: unity. For the first time, the 13 colonies began to see themselves not just as scattered provinces, but as a shared cause. Ordinary farmers, tavern keepers, former slaves, merchants, school teachers, they all asked the same question: if Britain could punish Boston today, who would be next tomorrow? In the taverns and town halls, talk of rebellion turned to talk of revolution. And what began as a protest was about to become a war. By 1774, the streets of Boston no longer echoed with the chatter of commerce, they echoed with marching boots and British bayonets. The coercive acts, known in the colonies as the Intolerable Acts, had turned Boston into a military prison. But instead of breaking the colonists' will, it forged their resolve. Delegates from the 13 colonies, once strangers separated by rivers, dialects, and loyalties, gathered in Philadelphia. This was the First Continental Congress, and for the first time they didn't speak as Virginians or New Yorkers, but as Americans. They didn't yet call for independence, but they did agree on something radical: resistance. They formed a boycott of British goods. They sent letters to King George III. They urged every colony to prepare militias just in case diplomacy failed. It was the birth of something dangerous: organization. And then, April 19, 1775. British troops march out of Boston, ordered to seize weapons hidden in Concord. But they don't go unnoticed. Colonial spies ride ahead. Militiamen assemble in the early dawn. At Lexington Green, 77 farmers and shopkeepers stand in a line. They are outnumbered, outgunned. Some are barely teenagers. A shot rings out. No one knows who fired it. The Redcoats open fire. 8 colonists die. The British march on to Concord only to be met by hundreds of armed militia. This time, the colonists fire back, from behind trees, fences, stone walls. By the end of the day, 73 British soldiers are dead. Nearly 200 are wounded or missing. The world's most powerful army has been bloodied by a bunch of blacksmiths and farmers. News spreads like wildfire. From town to town, colony to colony, the myth of British invincibility is shattered. And the people, once divided by colony lines, begin to see themselves as one. Not subjects, not rebels, but revolutionaries. In the hills of Massachusetts, a war has begun. But who will lead it? Can untrained militias defeat the most disciplined army on earth? The year is 1775. The colonies are on fire with rebellion. Lexington and Concord were only the beginning. In every town square and every tavern, men whisper of liberty and war. But revolutions need more than anger. They need strategy, structure, leadership. Enter George Washington, a tall Virginian planter with a commanding presence and military experience from the French and Indian War. Washington is appointed by the Continental Congress to lead the newly formed Continental Army. He accepts without hesitation, knowing full well the odds. His army? Barely trained volunteers, poorly clothed, poorly fed, many without shoes, few with real weapons. Their enemy? The most advanced military force on the planet. British Redcoats, merciless Hessian mercenaries, naval dominance, and yet, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, General Washington takes command not of an army, but of an idea: freedom. Still, the early days are grim. The siege of Boston drags on. Supplies run thin. Morale teeters. Washington needs a victory, or at least a miracle. That miracle comes in the form of books, brains, and barrels of artillery. Enter Henry Knox, a 25-year-old bookseller turned artillery expert. Washington tasks him with an impossible mission: retrieve 60 tons of cannons from Fort Ticonderoga in upstate New York and drag them hundreds of miles through winter snow. Knox does it. When the British wake one morning and see cannons looming over them from Dorchester Heights, they realize the game has changed. They evacuate Boston without a single American casualty. For the first time, the colonists have driven the British out of a major city. But this is just the beginning. As war spreads across the colonies, Washington and his men face constant defeat. At Brooklyn, at White Plains, they are pushed back again and again. Yet, they never stop fighting. By December 1776, morale is broken. The army is freezing. Men are deserting. Congress is in hiding. It seems the revolution might die in its infancy. And then, on Christmas night, Washington strikes. He leads a daring crossing of the icy Delaware River to launch a surprise attack on Hessian forces in Trenton. It works. The victory is small in scale, but enormous in meaning. For the first time, Americans believe they can win. From a few colonies comes an army. From chaos, a commander. From blood, the birth of something new. But the war is far from over, and the darkest days lie ahead. The year is 1777. It's been nearly 2 years since shots were fired at Lexington. The American Revolution rages on, but it's far from a glorious march to freedom. The Continental Army is starving. Uniforms are little more than rags. Ammunition is low, and the British are on the offensive, determined to crush the rebellion once and for all. Yet even in the darkest moments, the colonies find strength in the unlikeliest of places. At Saratoga, in upstate New York, American forces led by General Horatio Gates deliver a stunning defeat to British General John Burgoyne. It's the turning point the revolution desperately needed, because news of Saratoga travels across the Atlantic, and it gets the attention of a king. France, long an enemy of Britain, sees opportunity in the American cause. After years of hesitation, King Louis XVI agrees to support the revolution, not just with money, but with ships, weapons, and trained soldiers. Soon after, Spain and the Netherlands quietly join the effort. What began as a colonial uprising is now a global war, but the road to victory remains brutal. In the winter of 1777 to 1778, Washington's army camps at Valley Forge. The cold is unbearable. Food is scarce. Disease runs rampant. Yet something else is happening there, too: discipline. Under the guidance of Baron von Steuben, A Prussian officer with a flair for order and profanity, the Continental Army is transformed. Soldiers learn to drill, march, and fight like professionals. By spring, they emerge not as farmers with muskets, but as a real army. Years pass. The war stretches from the icy woods of New England to the humid fields of the South. Cities are taken and retaken. Allies fall. Betrayals rise, none greater than Benedict Arnold, a once hero turned traitor. But the dream of independence lives on. Then, in 1781, the tides shift one final time. British General Cornwallis moves his forces to Yorktown, Virginia. What he doesn't know, what he couldn't have known, is that Washington is moving too. And so is the French Navy. In a coordinated assault, American and French forces surround Yorktown by land and sea. After weeks of siege, Cornwallis surrenders. The war is effectively over. The colonies have done the unthinkable. They've defeated the British Empire. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris is signed. The United States of America is officially born. A nation built not by kings or empires, but by farmers, blacksmiths, former slaves, and shopkeepers. A nation carved out of rebellion, resilience, and relentless hope. They weren't supposed to win. They weren't trained to win. But they did, because they believed in something bigger than themselves: freedom. 13 colonies took on the world's greatest superpower. And they won. Because history, like revolution, doesn't wait for permission. It answers only to those braves enough to fight for it.